Hello and you're welcome to Business Highlights on Trust TV. On the show, we take you through some of the biggest business developments of the week, as well as analyze major policy decisions and how they affect the average Nigerian out there. I am your host, Chamun Dabeng. Let's talk numbers. Today on the show, we bring our attention to building Nigeria's post-oil future and analyzing how the country's reliance on crude oil has dwarfed the nation's economic development. We'll get into that right after the break. You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. On today's show, we bring our focus to the effects of Nigeria's reliance on crude oil. How has it impacted our economic growth? Nigeria, over the past 4 decades, has been heavily reliant on crude oil as a major source of export and as a means of building its foreign reserves. However, Nigeria is far past its oil boom days. A lack of operational refineries has forced the nation to import fuel, giving rise to subsidy, a waning contribution to Nigeria's GDP, and a plethora of other challenges. These issues have made the need for economic diversification far more imperative. Joining me in the studio today is development economist Dr. Emeka Okengu. But before we hear from him, let's take a look at this report. Once a major booster of the country's GDP, the oil sector contributed a mere 4.34% in Q4 of 2022. Nigeria's reliance on crude oil as its major export has now become a setback in the nation's quest for economic development, as the country grapples with challenges like the volatility of global crude oil prices, as well as oil bunkering in the Niger Delta, which has drastically reduced Nigeria's oil output, dropping from an estimated 2.4 million barrels per day to about 1.3 million barrels per day, with an estimated $700 billion revenue. However, leaders at the subnational level spoke on the importance of leadership and the role it plays in boosting the country's economy.
These episodes of surge and decline depends on the leadership at any point in time, the stock and content of human capital in the government, and then where the government gravitates in a spectrum of between what I call the 2 T's, transactional leadership, transformational leadership. Over the decades, you will find our leadership and performance and reforms gravitating between these 2 spectrums, one extremes of the extremes. Depending on where we are, we have either up or we go down.
Political leadership matters. If you don't have political will to take very difficult decisions that may be unpopular in the short term, but solves long-term problems that the rest of the people may not see, but you know it has to be done, then you are in good shape.
Nigerian leaders are concerned over the culture of blame game among the elite rather than focusing on pragmatic ways of addressing the pressing issues. However, the 18th Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, has a different view.
I don't believe in covering up incompetence. I don't believe in being politically correct and not saying that something was not done properly. And if we want to really make progress in this country, we have to learn from the good and the bad. We have to see what we did right, but we also have to look at where we went wrong. If I have a new government on May 29 that tells me, oh, I'm going to continue paying this subsidy for the next 3 years, I'll phase over 3 years, I'm going to say you're not serious. I mean, I'm going to just close my eyes and get ready for the next election in 2027 because we're going to be here in 2027 talking about the same things.
As Nigeria looks to economic diversification and development, there is a need for massive private sector investments, fiscal consolidation, and a need to assess Nigeria's economic surges and emulate the highs. All right, there you have it. Lots of discussions coming from different Nigerian leaders speaking on so many different issues. Now, let's come to you, Dr. Okengu. Now, can you break this down for us? In what ways has Nigeria's reliance on crude oil impacted or dwarfed our economic development?
I have this lecturer that will say that the answer is in the question. I don't think it's all been negative, vis-a-vis the contributions of crude oil or the dependence of crude oil. I think the major problem has been the management of the proceeds of crude oil. Remembering that we also have case studies that we can, match our situation against. Countries like the UAE, countries like Russia, countries like Saudi Arabia, a lot of oil-producing countries, have used their oils to be able to turn their destinies and, economies completely and totally around. And they were earning, close to what we were earning. So I think it might be a little bit, taking it to one swipe to say, oh, the oil sector or the oil industry has, driven us into where we are now. I think it is a management of the process of oil or the mismanagement of the process of oil that we should be discussing. Because for a sector that earned or that has earned over close to $1 trillion, for us as a country, I don't think it's done badly.
All right, so we've had moments where crude oil prices were around the $90s, $100 ranges. How come we weren't amongst the countries that were smiling to the bank at those points?
Because, okay, I mean, that's let me give you this explanation now. When, for those countries that have done well with their oil proceeds, companies that have what you call national national oil companies. But in our own case in Nigeria, what we engaged in was what they call the multinational oil companies. Now, what's the difference? The difference is that in our own case, we got into, depending on what they call the IOCs, okay, to do everything for us, bring in the rigs, bring in the technical, bring in, the storage, bring in the exploration, bring in the storage, bring in the ships, sell, and then we share profit. Okay, and we never had a timeline where we were saying to these people, okay, over this period of time, maybe after 20 years or 30 years, you should be able to now, start getting us into the system by now, or allowing us to now become, national in now developing our oil sector, which is where you can bring in the argument of the PIA. Okay, but the PIA has come probably a little too late, in the day. Because people have gotten very used to these Jews. The oil sector has become, the lowest hanging fruit for anybody. So it seems, okay, why would it get to my own time and then you want to turn it around? So it's going to take a lot of doing, a lot of pushing, a lot of government assistance, a lot of, that policy refocus at a much more higher level, to be able to get the oil sector where it should be. And what oil should mean to us.
All right, so when you say that the PIA is coming a little too late, I mean, is there really no hope to get something reasonable out of the act itself?
There is. It is an act. It is now the enforcement, okay, that now becomes a problem. It's become a monster you need to rein in, okay, because like I tried to explain to you, this is a sector that can make you a trillionaire in a matter of just one deal. Okay, if you're given an oil license, to import. You were here when you know about the scam or the crisis that bedeviled the subsidy regimes. It was renamed under recovery. And right now, every attempt, a clear example is that we've made so many attempts. I don't think there's been any government that succeeded in removing oil subsidy. Not even this. Knowing that in the past few weeks, the government has rescinded on that decision, that they weren't going to remove it. So that's the kind of, strong structure, that you're fighting. So it's just not about, okay, you have a policy document. It's about making certain that those provisions are enforced. Now, the key question and the catch-22 becomes, can you?
So this issue of subsidy, like you said, it's been a continuing issue within the country. Now, what do we do to actually, move from a point where we're not just discussing or making possible plans to remove subsidy? How do you deal with the impact that it's going to have on the people? How do you deal with the reactions that the people are going to obviously display once subsidy is removed?
You must create alternatives. Every other person who's tried to rein in, the monster. So 80% of the times, if you're not careful, it gobbles you. So what do you need to do? Some very wise people will decide to leave the monster alone, and then starve it of oxygen or whatever it is that makes it that powerful. And how do you do that? You start creating new, pathways. And in this case, we have so many we can explore. We can explore methanol, okay, which is there. We can explore hydrogen self-worth, which is there. These are all technologies that have been, patented, that are in use. We can even explore solar, okay, albeit at probably lower, not at an industrial scale, but we can begin to now cut down the powers of this monster, if you may, by gnawing slowly at its feet, okay, to be able to now widow our dependence. Because this monster grows bigger because we can't do without it.
So basically you're just feeding it.
Beautiful, and it's getting larger and more powerful. Okay, you touch me, you die. So why don't you now leave you and begin to now, slowly begin to move away to create new pathways that can be able to now create a slow need.
I like the fact that you actually refer to it as a monster that is growing, because even when you look at the negative effects that we've seen so far with the subsidy, the amount of money that we spend to keep subsidy running and other aspects of the Nigerian economy or other areas of Nigerian infrastructure that could have actually been developed and worked on are now suffering because so much money is going into it. Now, part of the reasons why people react the way or strongly react the way they do towards issues of subsidy, can it be said that it's a trust deficit towards the government? Like, if you say you're going to take out subsidy, they want to have a guarantee that this money that is now being freed up is going towards infrastructural development, is going towards education, is going towards health, is going towards actually improving the life of Nigerians. Okay,
it becomes again another catch-22, some kind of slippery slide. Because it's not you save a trillion naira or 2 trillion naira, it doesn't solve your infrastructure, needs in one fell swoop.
Of course.
And infrastructure is not something you wish, okay, you develop overnight. Now, some of this critical infrastructure, like your road infrastructure, will take years for you to be able to accomplish it. And remember that you're saving this subsidy as you're spending. So you might be requiring probably a 10-year budget, okay, a 10-year savings from your budgetary provisions to be able to now, get your infrastructure right. Okay. So what you need to do again is to be able to now implement on what you might be able to call critical needs, okay, against social needs. All right. But in now also doing that, there's also another, catch-22. To some people, some infrastructure might be critical, whereas the same infrastructure will be social to some other people. Okay, so it's not something you just wake up and say, okay, we're going to be freeing 2 trillion. Right, let's look at the areas that we must be able to put this into. Look at healthcare, for instance. Look at education, for instance. Look at transportation, for instance. Okay? Now, these are all critical infrastructure. You have over 20 million children out of school, okay? You have a lot of this, power infrastructure destroyed, especially in the northern part, because of insurrections and insurgencies, all right? You have a lot of this, you need to build your rail lines to be able to move people, from one position to the other, a lot less expensively. Now, these are infrastructure you just don't wake up and say in 3 months' time, we're going to be cutting tapes. Yes, you can do them piecemeal as you go, but it's also not just going to be something that one removal of subsidy, of subsidy regime against the budget, regime will be able to solve. That's the point I'm
All right, so when you talk about, the use of railway, this is something that has been, has had a lot of focus when it comes to transportation development within our country. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what happens to other aspects of transportation, of mass transit that could actually make life easier for Nigerians out there? Now, we had Governor El-Rufai during his time. He set up the El-Rufai buses. The only problem is right now many of them are not running due to a poor maintenance culture. But there should be other inexpensive or less expensive means of transportation that the government can actually build to make life easier for Nigerians.
I'll tell you what makes transport expensive is actually the cost, of that facility, of those buses. And you just mentioned one, maintenance, but it's not even enough to talk about maintenance. You should also talk about spares. So if we have a Jokuta steel that has the capacity to probably, produce almost every spares that you'll be needing to maintain those buses, okay? You have the Sobo machine tools, that is equally as equipped. And you have so many other the agricultural tools and all that. You have the SPV plant in Bauchi that can equally do as well. But I'll tell you what the issue is. I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that these facilities you have privatized. Okay? They're no longer in the hands of those who can be. And that privatization, I don't know if it carries, a use or lose clause. And in privatizing, some of these things should have been taught a little through. Who are you privatizing to? What programs does it have? How does it now impact on our national development? Now, if you talk about something like the rail system, Ajokuta has the facility to make rail tracks. If we had fixed our furnace that can be able to now produce liquid steel, that's what you need. Then get the molds and begin to make your tracks. But you need to import these tracks all the way from Ukraine. And even if you are getting them at probably $700, per billet, which is what I think it is. I don't know if it's gotten more than that now. Transporting that one billet, which is about 30 tons, will be requiring one trailer. Because if you put more than one on a trailer, it will crack, it will break the axles. And it will now cost you $400,000 to be able to transport one billet. That cost is now transferred to the end user. So it's about us now also thinking about how we can be able to bring STI, indigenous and STI solutions to now, into our industrial development. And then where is this industrial plan of Nigeria that captures human capital, that captures raw materials, that captures research outputs, okay, that captures funding, that captures timelines? I think that's where the issues are.
All right, we'll take a short break, and when we get back, we'll continue our discussion. We're going to be focusing on leadership and how it has impacted Nigeria's economic development. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. My name is Chamunda Beng, and I'm still here with development economist Dr. Emeka Okengo, and we're taking a look at Nigeria's post-oil future. Now, Dr. Okengo, we've had, different points, different leaders, and we've seen, some of the economic surges that we've had. So how much of an impact has leadership, has the Nigerian political climate had on the, economic development that we're looking at now, and also had on the crude oil space?
Well, before you talk about leadership, let's talk about the governance structure, because it will help you understand leadership better. We run a 3-tier structure in Nigeria where you have, the local governments, the state governments, referred to as the subnationals, and then the federal government, sitting, okay, at the top of the pyramid. Now, we don't have one law, okay, governing infrastructure development as it were, okay? You have states making their own laws on their focal areas.
Yeah.
You have, and then this will now deal with that space they call their state. And if you don't tie such laws or such programs to a national whole, and this is why in Nigeria you will now have what they call the federal government roads, or the Trunk A roads, and the Trunk B roads, and the Trunk C roads. It's a little bit of a paradox for me, because all these roads are running across local governments in Nigeria. Okay, so that delink is a major issue. And unfortunately, it also, translates to practically every other sector. The federal government is here talking about an agricultural policy, an agricultural program. The state governments are busy, looking at it from some other, climb. So there is that not meeting point or synergy, okay, where we now are able to now, meet minds and then make it seamless. Now, this creates a lot of challenges for leadership, okay, because clearly what I'm trying to struggle to tell is that there's a limit to what this federal government can do, okay, without the buy-in of the state government. Okay. Now, and if you don't have, the federal government and the state, the president and the governors on the same page on a matter, and the governors and members of the State House of Assemblies on the same page on the same matter, you already have, some kind of a disconnect.
All right. So because of time, let's try to move on quickly to our next, point of discussion. Now, we've seen a lot of dependence on crude oil to build up Nigeria's foreign reserves. And of course, it's been suffering of recent. So right now, Nigeria's external reserves has been on a steady decline. Currently, we have about $36.7 billion left. And the International Monetary Fund has actually warned Nigeria not to allow its reserves to fall below $30 billion. Now, what do you make of this? Can we pick up our reserves in time?
If you discount that number you just called now, or that figure you just called now, against our debts, do we really have any? If our debtors were to call in all our debts. So let's even start from that point of reality. Okay, forget that some of these debts have long-term moratoriums. In event that our debtors now say, okay, pay us our money, we're no longer, willing to wait. With 38 billion, pay our debts.
36.
Okay, so 36 now. So what we should be working towards will be to create new economic and prosperity pathways. Okay, and it's not even the oil sector that's built it. Okay, technically, because
yes,
right now the NNPC hasn't remitted, 1 naira to the Federation account as stand to be corrected. Okay, we're actually now supporting, the Federation account from taxes coming from the FIRS. So what we're basically doing is that we're just selling our oil, and it's not returning anything, for us vis-a-vis what we might be able to call return on investment. Maybe on equity, yes. I haven't said that. Oil just came into our system not too very long ago. At the time we were a country, we had agriculture, pulling the race. So it's that's what it is.
All right, sir. So I like that you actually brought up this aspect of how much we're actually making in return. I was doing some reading. So right now we have oil that, a barrel of crude oil right now costs about $70 to $80. Production cost for Nigeria is about $30. So when you even look at the exchange rate that we have, we're not really making that much back from crude oil.
No, you see, one time, if we go and do some more readings, you'll be very, very shocked to find out that it's only Nigeria that is producing oil at that very, high rate of $30 or more
per barrel.
And it's, in fact, at the point in time, I had written an article that, wait for it, if we get at $30, we are gone. Okay, and we did get under 20 barrels. All right, so what we're now doing is that we're now producing at a loss, and those losses has to be recovered from our creditors. So it's a long gamut of issues that we need to streamline, and that's why I keep saying, let's try to move a little bit away from oil. Oil is no longer king. Okay, we have gas that is more, priced, okay, than oil, and we are burning out of the 200, and we are blessed with about 200 trillion cubic feet of gas as a country, and I think we're burning about 3.3 billion, cubic feet every year. Just convert that into very simple currency of, let's even price one at $1. What we mean is that we are blowing in the air $3.3 billion annually, just burning it, and at the best using it to dry, cassava, which is what is being used to do in the Niger Delta, or light up our villages in the night and then create disease and environmental problems. So what I think, way I think we should go as a country is to get a little bit more resourceful, okay, or climb out of this oil box and then try to say, okay, when we didn't have oil, what were we doing better? And you'll be shocked to find out that the numbers will tell you that we are doing a lot better.
All right, so my last question for you before we go, we only have about a minute left. Now, Nigeria used to be a major supplier for the United States, but now they produce enough for their own nation. We became a major supplier for India, but now they're getting at a cheaper rate from Russia. So now that we're moving away from, our major customers, let me put it that way, what does Nigeria's post-oil future look like?
I told you. Again, you see, the US is not producing more. What US did was to just find the technology to frack their shale oil. And they became the world's biggest producers. So it's not as if they increased their production. What they did was introduce science, technology, and innovation into already what they had. Now, if we focused on producing something else, okay, we have over 6 billion metric tons of coal in Nigeria. Okay, we have so many other minerals that we can begin to turn. South Africa has started, extracting oil from coal. Go and read it up. Okay, so the South African energy company is doing a lot, with those, briquettes that now run as oil. And because they do what they call IGCC, Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle, it becomes a lot easier for us to, So I think the problem of Nigeria is that maybe we are fixated too much on the old ways. And, maybe it's because of the monster that seems to feed those who are protecting it.
I agree. It's time for us to look beyond what we've been looking at this time.
Beyond
yes. All right. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up the show right now. So a big thank you to my guest in the studio, development economist, Dr. Emeka Okengo. Thank you so much for joining us. And to our viewers out there, thank you so much for watching us. Please do follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you look, you'll definitely find us there. Just look up Trust TV News. My name is Chamunda Beng. Come back again. Let's talk numbers.